Right now I'm working on pulling off this VE pump. I took off the belt, get it out of my way, and then I started taking off this main pulley here. Breaker bar and a 15 mil, okay? And you notice if you go to spin it, this will just spin and you just rotate the whole engine, right? So what I did was I took this rod, stuck it through this access hole, and there's holes here for the torque converter. If you take that, stick it through the access hole, it can be a short rod even. Then when you try and turn it, this will in turn bring this down and hold this in place here so that you can actually get some torque on these without spinning over the motor. So once those 4 main bolts were out of there, I put some WD-40 in there and started working this off. Okay, so now I got this pulley off. I'm gonna go ahead and clean around this surface here, and then I can start taking off the rest of these bolts. This will allow me to rotate the motor over until the marks on the crank and the cam line up with each other, meaning that you're at top dead center. Then you can remove your pump. Short, short, long. There's that. That right there, just a rag that I shoved in there when I took off the power steering pump. Keep stuff out of there. So there's the exposed gears. Now that I have that front cover off there, you can see, I can go ahead and take out that rod that I put in that hole back there to keep everything from rotating. And you can see I put one of the bolts back into the crank there, and I can just use my breaker bar and rotate it until the lines match up on the 2 gears. The cam gear, which is that gear, right there. And the crank gear, just that one right there. Now that I have this rotated and you look, you can kind of see the notches line up there. That means you're pretty close to top dead center. Without a tool, that's the closest you're gonna get, and that's close enough for me for now. So now I can go ahead and I can start removing this nut and all these bolts and all this stuff back here and pull this thing straight out. Since I have my intake off, these 2 bolts on this plate are just kind of started. And then I detached the throttle cable, and then there was a little bolt right down in here, right underneath the VE pump. Sorry, the lighting's kind of bad. A little 10mm right under this that hooks it to this bracket, and then there's also a 10mm right here that goes and hooks this big bracket into the side of the block with a spacer. So now that I have those loosened and all my wires unhooked, these 2 wires, all my wires, I can go ahead and I can remove these quick and then get this bracket out of my way. I have all the injection lines off, and then I also took off this fuel delivery line here. Now that I got everything loose on this VE pump, put this nut back on, about 3/4 threads, pounded it, or hit it a couple times with a hammer while holding this, and you can see that it popped this gear off of the VE pump. So now I can take off the nut. Now that I got every line unhooked and pull her out. So it's gonna be full of fuel, obviously. So when you pull it, have a coffee can or something ready to catch your drainage. VE pump is off and draining into my coffee can. Since I'm selling this pump in about half an hour, I gotta get these lines off too, the guys buying the lines. So again, same procedure as taking them off the pump, just a 17mm. I got them lubed up. They should open pretty freely because they're just had diesel in them, but got them lubed up, and then take off these brackets here. Looks like a 12 or a 13.
Only a dowel we gotta put back in the block to get that dowel out.
Getting that made in USA.
Bracket that bolts here. It comes up and it's got a bar that's tapped for 2 bolts that come through the pump here, and then on the other side over here, and that helps hold the back end weight of this pump so it doesn't flex and crack. Your timing case and things are not light. Competition trim, those pumps will take 50 horse or more to run it. You know, this isn't exactly quite that high, but I mean, you're still 20-30 horse to run this pump, and on top of it, like I say, all the vibrations and shit from going down the road, wear and tear on that cast aluminum case. Cast aluminum doesn't flex so well. And the throttle is actually,
it's a push, huh?
That's a push.
Ooh.
So there's actually a bracket for a pickup. Like you could just run the rod down here, put your pull down here.
Yep.
Thing. Otherwise, the bracket that comes up here uses all the linkage off the stock Dodge P-pump truck is like $400.
Oh!
So, but that's because it's a linkage that goes up here. It's got your TPS on it and stuff, and it's got a rod that comes back to here and another lever. You know, it's a whole big apparatus that a lot of people forget about when they get the pump. They're like, oh yeah, I got a pump. Well, you know, that's the other thing about if you're going to put one of these pumps on a second gen, like say for a P-pump 24 valve, guys will get P-pumps off of a bus. Well, these holes here don't have the threaded inserts in them to bolt that linkage on. And then you basically have a pump that isn't gonna work, especially if you have an auto. Because if you have an auto, by rights, unless you're running a constant pressure valve body in a competition truck, the piece that bolts on here is also the linkage
for the kickdown,
for your kickdown cable that comes up and hooks into that and goes back to your transmission, so you got variable pressure as you're driving. That's a mount right there. There's a pair of springs that clip on here and would come back to the lever that mounts on here, and that's your return springs.
Oh, okay.
Without those, you'll have a very touchy throttle that it's like any little bump in the road is going to be enough to set it off.
Okay. So and then the shut off, which I'll have to put on later, is it just pulls up, right? Or does it push down?
It pushes down to shut off.
Okay.
But when it goes to turn the motor on, it pulls up.
Okay, and that mounts right here, right?
Yep, that mounts here.
Okay.
So
I think Larry B's is like $200 for the whole kit.
Yeah.
So okay.
Yeah.
Cool. When you're converting it to a P pump, this is another fitting that you will need that you do not have or will not have with your VE pump. This right here is an overflow valve, Torque Tech makes one. This is actually a Bosch. I believe it's adjustable. I believe that's what this nut here is for. You can see it's just got a hole in it, and that's where the overflow fuel goes. And you can see on the stock block, or the stock head for the first gen, this was actually in the way, so I couldn't actually get this fitting into where it needs to go. So what I had to do was, oh shit, whoops. What I had to do was take a die grinder and grind out that area in there so that I could actually start this bolt, or start this fitting. Otherwise I would have had to pull the pump and then install this and then put the pump back in. That's just way too much work. So you can see right here that there's lots of extra material here on the head. I'm not exactly sure why they did this. It's basically just solid steel. So it's no problem. Machine that out a little bit. Goes on there like so. Tighten it up, and then this hole will be up here. And you have a banjo fitting that goes on here. It comes back to here, hooks up to your injector return lines. And then there's a T, and then there's a return back to your fuel tank. Another thing I found helpful for this P-pump conversion was actually this air view test hose from Larry B's. Now this shows when there's air in the fuel because the return will be have bubbles in the line. So this is a clear fuel line that comes from the banjo fitting on the Torque Tech return valve. which comes back, which you'll need to buy, by the way. This is not a Torque Tech one. This is a Bosch product because it has a bigger orifice for more fuel to flow. The Torque Tech ones are a bit restrictive because the hole is like microscopic, so that really restricts return flow, which is important. This goes back to a 5/16 steel line into this T fitting, which came with my lift pump setup. It has the injection return line, which comes in, the overflow from the P pump itself, and then it has the line that actually physically goes back to the tank. You can see I bent it in there, brought it all the way back along the frame rail, and it goes all the way back into my fuel cell. Some of you guys will have the original gas tank out of the Dodge. Another thing, make sure you have a vent, and make sure that you have a good pickup and a good fuel pump, because obviously with the P pump you're going to need to run a different fuel pump than with the VE pump, because the P pump pulls a ton more fuel than the VE, so that's important there. Trim this hose to fit once I get everything else in here, but that is that. That's also obviously essential. Right here there are some nuts that you need to buy to mount this, and make sure that you do support the case or support the P pump on this, because otherwise you can crank the case. So I've been down here going through my Heim fittings and turnbuckles, and I found some small 5/16 Heims in one of my parts boxes that I'm actually going to use for my throttle setup. Now I'll kind of show you what I got going on in here. This is actually the stock throttle off of a VE pump Cummins, and I had it mounted down here to the fuel pump where the original lift pump was, and then I also have to mount the back because if you look, you probably can't tell, but it flexes under pressure. So now I am trying to hook my P pump up to that throttle, and I am using a bracket that I made here that bolts to the throttle on the P pump. You can see there's the throttle, and this is actually a push style connector originally, but I extended this arm so it's on the other side of the pivot, and now you can just have a pull throttle. So this is no throttle and this is full throttle. So now it all works together. What I have to do now is connect this rod here with this throttle bracket here. So what I'm doing is I think this is our fuel line, 5/16 fuel line. Might be a little bigger actually, but anyways, the Heim fits in there perfectly. And then I have just a nut that's on there, and I'll weld that to my brake line, and then I'll cut it to length and weld the other one on. And then I have adjustability because obviously these are threaded Heims, like so. And then this is just a bracket. I don't know if I'm going to use it, but it's a bracket I actually had for fog lights. The fog lights mounted, as you can probably tell, something like that. And it actually is the same size bolt as the opening on the Heim here, so it works out pretty good. So I might end up taking that and mounting it onto my throttle plate like this. And then on the other side, obviously just taking the Heim joint, and I have this hole threaded here with adjustability. So you can see there's 3 holes there for adjustability, and then this other mounting hole is for mounting the second bolt onto the throttle here. And then back here, I can either tap a hole into the bell housing here, or I can come off of one of these bolts to come down and support this, or what I'm electing to do, you probably can't see, but there's a starter right under here. And there's one bolt that's like directly below, so I'll just have a tab that's welded onto my throttle plate here, and then it bolts in with the starter. And then I also made an attachment that bolts from that bracket to this compressor. Here's the bracket that I made. This bottom piece here was actually a bracket that came with one of my other compressors. You can see the holes are actually pretty close. I had to remount that hole. It was completely for a different application. It wasn't even for this engine, but you can see it kind of actually worked out pretty well. And then it bolts up to those holes that I mentioned, those sleeves on the engine. Gusset there, gusset in the back. Nothing crazy, but it'll work good. I got it painted flat black now.
One more nut and then that bolt.
Christ, that thing is big. Jesus Christ, that thing is big.